Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this, as always, is...
Murder Coaster.
Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, and hear the story of a serial killer obsessed with sorcery, necromancy, astronomy, magic, and spells, who sought to rid the streets of 1990s New York of crime, and envisioned himself as the infamous Zodiac Killer, who terrorized San Francisco 20 years earlier. It is an utterly bizarre story, with a conclusion as wild as it gets. It is the story of Eddie Heriberto Seda, the New York Zodiac.
Let's begin. Prologue. It was written in the stars. On June 4th, 1990, Heriberto Seda sat down at his desk in his small bedroom in his mother's cramped Brooklyn apartment, a place he'd lived since he was a small child, and began to compose a letter.
In the many years he'd lived in the room, he'd barely ever ventured out. He was 22 now, and only went out at night to preach the Bible, check the payphones he'd rigged to steal change, and to hunt his prey.
As his hero, the mysterious San Francisco Zodiac Killer, had once said in secret code, quote, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill."
Heriberto was known as Eddie to his mother and sister and the few other random people who knew him, but he didn't think of himself as Eddie or Heriberto. He thought of himself as Faust, the legendary sorcerer and alchemist. He also considered himself the new Zodiac Killer.
Outside the heavily barred windows was the hustle and bustle of the city, shouting, the belching of car horns, screams, police sirens, and the occasional gunshot. It was a squalid, dangerous neighborhood, one of the worst in New York. Junkies and crackheads roamed the dark alleys like zombies. Sex workers and drug dealers ran the streets. Crime was rampant, and Eddie considered himself a vigilante of sorts, bringing the vengeance of God to bear on the horror of the streets.
The first letter he'd sent the police had been ignored, as well as the notes he'd left beside the bodies. But he was through with being ignored. Now, he was going to the press, like the original Zodiac Killer before him. Now, he'd rule New York like the original Zodiac had ruled San Francisco 20 years earlier. He was carrying on the sacred work. He'd become the new Zodiac Killer, the New York Zodiac.
Now there were 3 victims, a Scorpio, a Gemini, and a Taurus. Shootings they couldn't deny, and he wouldn't stop until he'd shot victims from every sign of the Zodiac, all 12.
He slipped on a pair of leather gloves, took a felt-tip pen, the same type of pen the original Zodiac Killer had used so long ago, and marked the top of his paper with the infamous Zodiac symbol, a circle with a cross inside. Then, using a protractor and a math compass, he made a perfect circle with 3 triangles within it, like a pizza pie with only 3 slices cut, a Zodiac dial. And to each of the triangles he put the astrological symbols of Scorpio, Gemini, and Taurus.
His introduction complete, he began his message.
This is the Zodiac. The 12 sign will die when the belts in the heaven are seen. The first sign is dead on March 8th, 1990, 1:45 a.m. White man with cane shot in the back. The second sign is dead on March 29th, 1990, 2:57 a.m. White man with black coat shot in the side in front of house. The third sign is dead on May 31st, 1990, 2:04 a.m. White old man with cane shot in front of house.
He signed it Faust, underlining the name 3 times so as to make no mistake. Then scrawled,
"No more games, pigs."
Then a large Z. And as an afterthought, he wrote,
"All shot in Brooklyn, no grooves on bullet." Eddie considered himself a modern-day Faust, not the fabled Dr. Faustus who'd sold his soul to Mephistopheles in the story by Christopher Marlowe, but the historical, real man, Johann George Faust, whom the legend was based on, a wandering astrologer, alchemist, and necromancer who practiced what he called natural magic and made his way reading horoscopes for a living.
His letter finished, Eddie took his red, dog-eared paperback copy of the 6th and 7th Book of Moses off the shelf, where it sat neatly beside his treasured white Bible, everything in its place, perfectly so, with military precision.
Eddie had always been obsessed with the military and kept his room like a barracks, extremely neat and well organized. His bed perfectly made, the pink satin quilt that was decorated with roses, sharply folded back and tightly drawn. His model airplanes, battleships, and destroyers displayed museum perfect on the shelf beside his Pope Paul medallion, baseball cards, and serial killer cards arranged just so.
In the corner was a pile of perfectly stacked magazines. Soldier of Fortune, Guns and Ammo, and UFO comic books, arranged beside a stack of porn videos, biggies and Long Dan Silver. And on the wall hung a church calendar with a bough of dried palm fronds from Palm Sunday services, next to a large poster of all the star constellations.
On his bureau, his knives were arranged side by side, as well as his razor-sharp throwing stars and brass knuckles.
Eddie opened the paperback copy of the 6th and 7th Book of Moses, a book of spells, which was filled with astrological esoterica, magic charms, Kabbalistic circles, and secret necromantic incantations to summon the dead to do his bidding, some of which was written by the legendary sorcerer Faust himself.
Turning to page 161, he read of the magical use of the Psalms, careful to study each word intently so as not to get anything wrong. It read,
"You should write the 83rd Psalm properly upon pure parchment and suspend it around your neck, and by doing so you will abide safely in war, avoiding defeat and captivity."
Eddie then opened the white Bible, turning the thin, delicate pages to the 83rd Psalm, writing out the words on a clean sheet of paper, how the Lord took crafty counsel against the hidden ones and made his enemies as dung for the earth, carefully spelling out his pleas to God, asking that his enemies ever be ashamed and dismayed, that they may perish in disgrace.
When he was done, he carefully poked 2 holes in the paper, threaded a black shoelace through it, and hung it around his neck.
He then studied Psalm 20 for further instructions.
"Mix in a vessel rose oil, water, and salt. Pray over it 7 times in the most holy name, in a low voice with reverence. Then anoint with this oil your face and hands, and sprinkle it on your clothing, and you will remain free from danger and suffering that day."
So he took a small bowl of water, shook out a few drops of rose oil into it, sprinkled in some salt, mixing the concoction with his finger as he prayed, pleading with God to protect the anointed one and to accept all his offerings and sacrifices.
He was certain God would protect him. He'd kept himself pure. He was 22, but still a virgin. In fact, he'd never even kissed a girl.
He went to his drawer and slid it open, examining his row of homemade zip guns, looking for the perfect one.
They were crude weapons, metal pipes strung with shoestrings and rubber bands, the ends wrapped in white adhesive tape. But they were deadly, and he was quite proud of them. He'd made them with plans from an army manual he'd gotten in the mail. Some of the homemade guns took 22 caliber bullets, others 38s, and others 9mm, but they were all untraceable, as there was no rifling which left imprints on the bullet that could link them to a specific gun.
And these bullets, too, he ordered through the mail, from ads in the back of his survivalist magazines.
He gazed over the array of zip guns, choosing the 9mm weapon, 12-inch piece of pipe with a T-juncture in the middle, where a 6-inch piece of pipe extended, serving as a handle.
He put on his boots, the ones with 2-inch platform heels, making him taller, nearly just as tall as the San Francisco Zodiac, all part of his transformation. Slipping on a beret and then wrapping a black scarf around his neck and face.
Eddie's zodiac sign, Leo the lion, was high in the sky, giving him power, while Orion and the Seven Sisters were hiding below the horizon. It was the perfect night to kill. It was written in the stars.
When Eddie's letters hit the press, the New York Post ran a huge front-page headline reading,
"Bizarre letter links 3 city gun attacks. Riddle of the Zodiac shooter."
And just as he wished, New York was plunged into fear, and many did in fact wonder if the San Francisco Zodiac Killer from the 1960s was now operating in New York City.
For 6 years, this maniac would stalk the streets of New York, often with multi-year gaps, shooting random victims based on their astrological signs, sometimes using a knife as well, stabbing one woman over 100 times. And the world would wonder, who was this New York Zodiac Killer?
Chapter 1. Little Eddie.
Heriberto Seda, who'd go by Eddie, was born July 31st, 1967.
His mother, Gladys Alvarado, was born and raised in Puerto Rico and was known for her striking beauty.
Eddie, too, would be very good-looking, with fashion model dark eyes, strong jawline, well-defined cheekbones.
But with his short stature, he'd never grow taller than 5'7", his childish smile and widow's peak hairline, he would have, at least to me, an uncanny resemblance to Eddie Munster. I just really see this guy as Eddie Munster gone terribly, terribly awry.
Eddie's mother had been married once before he was born, and he had two older half-sisters, Angelica and Kathy. Then Eddie's father abandoned the family when he was 3, and Gladys married again, having a daughter she named Gladys after herself.
Eddie never spoke with his biological father after he left the family, though he would continue a relationship with his stepfather, although his stepfather, too, would leave the family shortly after Gladys was born. The older daughters, Angelica and Kathy, got married and moved away.
Now it was just little Eddie, his mother and baby half-stepsister, and the family moved to the third-floor walk-up at 2730 Pitkin Avenue, between Euclid and Pine in Brooklyn, East New York, where they'd stay thereafter, Gladys raising the family through welfare.
Despite the several divorces, Gladys was an extremely devout Catholic and rode the subway into Manhattan to attend the Spanish-language Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral every single day.
The neighborhood they'd moved to was not a good one. In fact, it was notorious for crime and murder. A sign at the local police station reading, quote, "Give us 26 minutes, we'll give you a homicide," end quote. Sex workers and junkies littered the corners. The apartment building was filled with drug dealers, and Gladys imposed strict religious morals on little Eddie and his sister, raising them not to associate with anyone in the neighborhood, to not go out when not necessary, to remain chaste and abstinent, sexually pure, devoting themselves to God, something that little Eddie would take to heart.
Eddie was a happy kid, eyes gleaming and his big Eddie Munster smile. But when he was 5, he had a high fever followed by 2 seizures. And afterwards, it was said he was different, sullen and withdrawn. Teachers grew concerned, saying he would space out while in the middle of a conversation, just get a blank look in his eye and stop talking. But he was still an above-average student, excelling in art, math, and science.
He loved Donnie and Marie, and would dance about happily to their wholesome musical routines whenever their variety show came on television.
Man, I remember that show. So cheesy. At first, Eddie fawned over his little half-sister Gladys. Happy Days was a big show at the time, the Fonz and all that. And Eddie thought little Gladys resembled the character Chachi, the Fonz's little cousin, played by Scott Baio, who later have his own show, Joni Loves Chachi. So he began calling her Chachi, a name that stuck. After that, little Gladys would forever be known as Chachi.
But when Eddie began to go through puberty, a bizarre change overcame him. He suddenly stopped talking to people. If someone tried to engage him in conversation, he'd coldly say right to their face,
"Why should I talk to you?"
and then just walk away.
Unlike the other boys, he showed no interest in girls or dating, though he did begin collecting pornography. He became even more reclusive than he had been, and he became surly, angry, and violent. He began to beat little Chachi, some later theorizing this was because he thought she had stolen his mother's love from him. Who knows? The whole thing is very disturbing, and there were strange things festering in that tiny apartment.
His grades plummeted. He grew obsessed with the military, saying he wanted to be Special Forces Green Beret, and he became deeply fascinated with guns, reading magazines like Guns and Ammo, and military magazines like Soldier of Fortune, which he'd collect and keep meticulously organized.
Now a senior at Franklin K. Lane High School, the same school gangster John Gotti had gone to, he somehow got his hands on a starter pistol. You know, those guns that only fire blanks that are used in sports to start a race.
Well, he was real proud of the thing, and showing it off in class, he fired it.
It was loud as hell, stunning and terrifying his teacher and the classmates.
He was suspended, which he thought was stupid because it wasn't a real gun and could only shoot blanks. And after his suspension was over, he stubbornly refused to come back, saying he was going to join the military. Recruiters came and interviewed him, but his application was denied.
And here we're faced with two differing versions of what actually happened. According to Eddie, he didn't pass the psychological test, which wouldn't be surprising. But according to his mother, he wasn't allowed in the military because he was an only son, which really doesn't make any sense.
What many believe actually happened was that Gladys refused to sign the permission papers Eddie needed to join, as he was still only 17, and point to the fact that after he was denied entry into the military, he basically refused to speak to his mother.
Chapter 2. The Man of the House.
Now Eddie began to take on a new role, calling himself the man of the house. He became overly protective of his mother and sister, but not in a kind and caring manner, rather in a domineering way, saying no outsiders, no one at all, really, was ever to enter the house, demanding to know where Gladys and Chachi were at all times.
Eddie's mother Gladys and his sister Chachi slept in the same room, and Chachi wanted to move into the living room and make it her bedroom, but Eddie forbid it, demanding she stay out of the living room and remain in her mother's room.
And he continued to beat his sister, to the point where she went to school with bruises on her. Bruises that were noticed by teachers who alerted social workers, who began an investigation into the abuse.
But in the end, nothing came of it. The 80s in East New York were a notoriously tough time, and the case just fell through the cracks.
While Eddie had no job, no social life, no prospects or friends, he did find a means of making money. He would take a plastic bag with a string attached to it, jam it up into the compartment of a payphone where the change was returned, so that the coins would fall down into the bag that he'd be able to fish out with the string. And for those listeners who don't know what a payphone is, no, haha, just kidding, but maybe some of you.
Yeah, you had to pay money to make phone calls, and it was super expensive. It was crazy. International
Facts.
phone calls like hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Facts.
I still marvel that it's all free now. And it was just a scam. The phone companies didn't cost them any money.
I know, it's wild.
Well, Eddie would save up this change that he stole from the payphones, stacking it in his room in meticulous piles like a pirate, and then bring it to the post office and have it transferred into money orders he'd use to buy military manuals and subscribe to survivalist magazines.
He became obsessed with serial killers, in particular Ted Bundy. And as he watched documentaries on them, he'd sit with a pen and paper, taking notes.
I mean, I do the same thing. Maybe he was thinking of starting a podcast.
Yeah, totally.
And he may have thought he actually looked like Ted Bundy, who is often credited with being one of the better looking serial killers. And to Eddie's credit, he was very good looking. He had those model looks, a chiseled chin, thick eyebrows, dark eyes. But as I've said, in my opinion at least, his goofy grin really made him look like Eddie Munster.
started collecting serial killer trading cards.
Nothing wrong with that.
While always extremely religious, Eddie became obsessed with spells and sorcery. In a neighborhood used bookstore, he came across a pulp paperback copy of the 6th and 7th Book of Moses. Which leads us to Chapter 4. The 6th and 7th Books of Moses.
Okay, let's get into this crazy book that Eddie was obsessed with. It's really a book of spells, a grimoire, that was claimed to have been written by Moses himself and passed down through the ages as hidden books of the Hebrew Bible. Or, as is stated on the back cover, quote, "The wonderful acts of the old Hebrews, taken from the Mosaic books of the Kabbalah and the Talmud, to instruct the reader in spells used to create some of the miracles portrayed in the Bible, as well as to grant other forms of good fortune and good health." End quote.
The book contains reputed Talmudic magic names, words, and ideograms, some written in Hebrew and some with letters from the Latin alphabet. It also contains seals, or magical drawings accompanied by instructions for, among other things, spiritual protection, controlling the weather, and contacting the dead or biblical religious figures.
Although historians haven't been able to trace the exact origins of these writings, they were most likely written in Germany, sometime in the 1700s. And then these writings were compiled by publisher Johann Schiebel and mass-produced in 1849 as cheap pamphlets, going out all through Germany.
Some of what was printed was said to have come from the famous wandering sorcerer, Johann George Faust.
Ah, yes, the mysterious Johann George Faust. So, no one knows when or even where this guy was born. His name first appears in writings in 1507, when the abbot and humanist Johannes Trithemius warns a colleague about him, calling him a braggart and a necromancer, with a talent for blasphemous boasts.
And civic and university notes have him listed as an astrologer and performer of tricks and fraud. And by the 1530s, he shows up in city records from Nuremberg to Munster.
It's believed he died at the Lohan Inn in 1539 when he accidentally blew himself up in an alchemical experiment.
Some say he'd sold his soul to the devil, and that Mephistopheles had come at midnight to collect his due.
Anyway, back to the 6th and 7th books of Moses, and this is really interesting and some wild shit right here, guys. For it shows the bizarre spread of ideas and superstitions, how they move through cultures almost like a contagious disease. So, copies of this book, this cheap pamphlet, were brought to America from Germany by none other than the Amish, who were escaping religious persecution. So the Amish bring this weird book to America. It gets passed around to different German-speaking immigrant communities. And somewhere along the line, around 1880, it was translated from German into English, and then again printed as cheap pamphlets by printing presses looking to make a quick buck. This time in America, going all over as this weird, fun pulp book, being sold in train stations and occult shops and freak shows as an oddity.
The book was then discovered by African Americans who spread it around their communities, some of them bringing copies down into the Caribbean, where they had relatives, and it became a part of root doctor ceremonies and hoodoo.
Then started being sold in voodoo shops. And then it just gets crazier. It made its way to Jamaica, where it was deemed among the founding works of the Zion revivalist movement and picked up by Rastafarians. And it's even sung about in reggae songs. Toots and the Maytals even had a song about it called 6 and 7 Books of Moses. And I'll tell you, I love Toots and the Maytals. Saw them many times. They had a really cool, unique rocking sound. It was very sad when he died of COVID in 2020.
And, of course, eventually the book found its way into the hands of Heriberto Seda, a.k.a. Eddie Munster, who was just as impressed as everyone else.
And the book itself has a very impressive feel. The title page itself stating,
"The 6th and 7th Books of Moses, the mystery of all mysteries, a citation on all spirits, the spirit in the burning bush, helmet of Moses and Aaron, healing by amulets, the wonderful magic and spiritual arts of Moses and Aaron, and the wise Hebrews taken from the Mosaic books of the Kabbals and Talmuds for the good of mankind."
Eddie began performing the weird rituals in the book, some of which were white magic used for good, others falling into the dark arts, including how to entice the dead to do your will, and how to invoke a demon.
And Eddie was spiraling into madness and psychosis, locked endlessly alone in his cramped little bedroom, a domineering and violent bully to his mother and sister, terrified of the streets outside, one part Travis Bickle of Taxi Driver, one part Dostoevsky's Underground Man.
And then something happened that changed his life forever. The BBC aired a documentary on the mysterious Zodiac Killer who had terrorized San Francisco in the late 60s.
Chapter 3: The New York Zodiac Killer.
The original Zodiac Killer is believed to have killed at least 5 people, and in letters he wrote to newspapers and the police, he claimed to have killed as many as 39, often writing in secret codes, some of which took 50 years to be solved.
There are endless theories and rabbit holes and red herrings in this case, ranging from theories that whoever was writing the letters was taking credit for murders they didn't commit, to that the murders were committed by the Manson family, to that the Zodiac was also the killer of the Black Dahlia. There are numerous suspects. There's DNA found from under a stamp, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Go to any Zodiac group and you'll find folks fiercely debating over it all. But the truth is, it's a mystery, and no one knows for sure who the Zodiac Killer was.
I have a friend in San Francisco who is an expert on the Zodiac. We talked briefly about making a podcast. Maybe one day we'll cover the original Zodiac and have her on. Her name's Holly. She's really cool. She's interviewed a lot of people about this over the years. And another interesting fact, the Grateful Dead song, Dire Wolf, with the chorus, "I beg of you, don't murder me," was inspired by the Zodiac. As all them hippies were wandering the streets of San Francisco high on acid at night while the Zodiac was stalking. And Jerry Garcia even dedicated the song to him once, saying, "This one goes out to that Zodiac cat."
Anyway, for Eddie, the documentary on the Zodiac Killer was a revelation. Because of the 5th and 6th books of Moses, he'd become fascinated with astrology and the zodiac, and this case involved cryptograms, hidden messages, what appeared to be possible alchemic connections, military links, and, most importantly, power. So much power. The Zodiac kept the entire Bay Area of California in fear for years. For weird little Eddie, sequestered in his room, the idea of being powerful was incredibly enticing.
And murder. Eddie had always been obsessed with murder, violence, and serial killers. So basically, the story of the Zodiac Killer had it all.
Eddie wanted to continue the work of the Zodiac, to take over, feel that power. But he approached the Zodiac differently, focusing on the stars and constellations. He was Leo, the lion, roaming the skies, more powerful than the blind hunter Orion, pursuing the 7 sisters. And he would kill one person for each of the 12 zodiac signs, but only when the stars were in perfect alignment.
And so, Eddie began to prepare.
He ordered a military manual through the mail, which detailed how to construct a zip gun out of lead pipes. He meticulously worked at it, using a drill to ream out the barrel, then scraping the tube with a long, round file, constructing a simple firing pin out of a large nail and thick rubber band.
Using adhesive tape, he'd secure the rubber band to the pipe, slip the bullet in through an opening, then pull the nail and rubber band back, let go, and the nail would come slamming into the bullet, causing it to fire.
If you Google it, you'll find some pretty well-crafted zip guns with wooden handles, even triggers that release an actual bolt. Usually just the bolt you'd use to lock a shed door, and constructed to look like real guns. They were very popular with juvenile delinquents and gangs in the 1950s. But Eddie's were pretty basic and crude, just lengths of pipe with a nail inside.
He'd work on his guns for days at a time, and wouldn't eat or sleep while constructing them, amped out of his mind on adrenaline and psychosis. Then, when no one was home, and he was sure his neighbors were out, he'd crank up the stereo and TV and test fire the gun into a phone book, wrapping the muzzle in an old blanket to muffle the sound.
Test firing one gun, he'd almost blown his hand right off, putting ammunition that was too powerful for the tube thickness, the pipe ballooning outwards. But miraculously, it didn't explode. Luck was on his side.
Maybe it was the magical incantations he performed that saved him.
Now that he had his weapons, he charted out the stars for the best time to kill, and began stalking his prey, and announced his intent.
Chapter 4. So begins the hunt.
On November 17, 1989, a letter was sent to East New York's 17th Precinct Police Station, addressed to Anti-Crime, reading,
This is the Zodiac. The first sign is dead. The Zodiac will kill the 12 signs in the belt when the zodiological light is seen. The Zodiac will spread fear. I have seen a lot of police in Jamaica Avenue and Eldon Lane, but you are no good and will not get the Zodiac. Orion is the one that can stop Zodiac and the Seven Sisters.
After detectives checked through open cases to see if any connections could be made, they considered it just another letter from one of New York's many, many crazies. Numerous crackpot and hoax letters arrived at police headquarters every day, with people looking to gain attention. Cops actually passed the letter around and laughed at it before it was sent off to a file cabinet and forgotten.
On March 9th, 1990, at around 3 o'clock in the morning, 49-year-old Mario Orozco emerged from a subway station in East New York, Brooklyn, after his shift in the kitchen of a Manhattan restaurant was finished. He limped down the street using a cane.
Mario suffered from many health issues, including eyesight issues. And here we see one way that Eddie, Heriberto Seda, was different than the original Zodiac Killer.
The original Zodiac Killer could be bold, brave even, once appearing in a full-on costume with a hood to attack young people head-on. But Eddie was a sad coward. He preyed on the weakest of society, the infirm, the elderly, the destitute, and snuck up on them, hiding in the shadows and shooting them in the back.
And that's where he was that night, hiding in the shadows of a graveyard, waiting for Mario. And as the old man passed, Eddie emerged behind him and coldly shot him in the back.
Mario fell to the ground, screaming, "Help!" then rolled onto his side as Eddie stepped up to him, pointed his weapon, that crude lead pipe with the rubber band, at his head. And Mario wisely played dead. He shut his eyes, held his breath, and Eddie, wearing a dark hat with a black scarf wrapped around his face, wrapped a paper note around his zip gun and laid it on the pavement beside Mario, then walked off.
Then Mario stood up and continued walking home, a bullet lodged beside his spine.
It was East New York, a place used to crime and gunshots, and no one came to his aid. No one called the police. Mario stumbled home, made himself a pot of coffee, drank a cup, then called 911 and calmly stated, "I've been shot."
On March 29, 1990, around 3 o'clock a.m., 34-year-old Ecuadorian immigrant Jermaine Montronesto wandered down the sidewalk drinking a 40-ounce of malt liquor. He'd had a fight with his girlfriend and instead of going home, was wandering about getting wasted, heading to his father's house to spend the night, passing the graveyard in East New York, Brooklyn, where Eddie, the wannabe Zodiac, stood hidden in the shadows.
Though he didn't know his zodiac sign, Eddie still saw the hard-working immigrant who was having a bad night as a sinner brought to him by God, and stepped from the shadows, raised his zip gun, and fired into the man's side as he turned, the bullet slicing through his liver, Jermaine falling to the ground.
Eddie darted to the fallen man, searched his pockets for ID, and found his passport, and ran off with it.
When Eddie looked at the passport and saw he was a Gemini, he was elated, seeing it as a sign that God was with him. And furthermore, that his name was German, the same country as Faust, was yet another sign.
Meanwhile, Jermaine Montenestro managed to crawl to his father's sandstone house and cry for help. He was rushed to the hospital, and when he was told he would survive, he said it was a miracle, that God was with him.
They both had God on their side.
Jeez.
On May 31st, 1990, at 1:30 in the morning, 78-year-old World War II combat veteran Joseph Prost was wandering the streets, limping with a cane to aid him, digging in the trash for food, something he was ashamed of, but did out of necessity, at night. He found a half-eaten sandwich, put it in his pocket, and headed back to his small apartment in Woodhaven, which was just over the Brooklyn border and in Queens, not realizing he was being followed.
As he went to unlock his door, a young man approached him and asked him for a glass of water, before pulling out a zip gun and shooting the elderly veteran in the lower back, hitting his kidney.
As Joseph fell to the ground, Eddie placed a handwritten note next to his body and then disappeared into the night.
Joseph, too, initially survived the attack, but although he had seen his attacker and talked to him, he was nearly blind and suffering from early-onset dementia. First saying his attacker was African American, then white, then possibly Hispanic.
It was all very frustrating for homicide detective Bill Clark, who was investigating the case, especially as the strange note left him with an uneasy feeling. Bill had been a detective on the Son of Sam case, David Berkowitz, and the two cases felt eerily familiar. A psychotic lone gunman terrorizing the city.
And because the shooting he was investigating had happened in Queens, not Brooklyn, Bill wasn't aware of the other notes that had been left at the two Brooklyn shootings. It was the height of the crack epidemic, and murders were sadly quite common.
On June 6, 1990, a strange letter addressed to the editor arrived at the New York Post, purporting to be about 3 murders which had been committed in Brooklyn, which was then forwarded to police reporter Anne Murray, who faxed a copy to some detectives she knew.
The detectives looked into it but found there were no murders committed on the dates given. But by mere coincidence, Detective Bill Clark just happened to be passing the desk of one of the detectives and caught a glimpse of the fax and saw the Zodiac symbol, asking, "What you got there?"
The detective said it was nothing, just some crackpot, that there were no Brooklyn shootings that linked up to the dates. But when Bill Clark saw it mentioned an old white man with a cane being shot on May 31st at 2:40 in the morning, he exclaimed, "Bullshit! I handled that case, but it wasn't in Brooklyn. It was in Queens, only yards away from the Brooklyn border, which the shooter must not have realized."
Detective Clark realized his hunch was right. They had a serial shooter on their hands, and they wondered, could it possibly be the San Francisco Zodiac come to New York?
Chapter 5. The Prayers of Eddie Munster Answered.
Locked away in the back bedroom of his mother's apartment, Eddie was growing increasingly frustrated. Every day he scanned the newspapers, watched the news, waiting for the announcement of the new Zodiac, and every day there was nothing. He looked for articles about the murders he'd committed. Nothing. What was going on?
He'd shot a Scorpio, a Gemini, and a Taurus, and written letters to both the New York Post and 60 Minutes about it.
Since the last victim had been a Taurus, Eddie consulted his magical Moses book and read,
"Taurus the bull, through which all transactions and enterprises are prospered and fostered so that they may go forward with the will of God. But to this end, constant prayers are necessary, and particularly on Sunday.
So Eddie prayed, and prayed, then went out for a walk, where he discovered his prayers had been answered.
There on the newsstand were stacks and stacks of New York Post newspapers, with the headlines reading, "Riddle of the Zodiac Shooter."
Eddie was overwhelmed with excitement and pleasure, and quickly bought a copy with change from his payphone scam, and hurried back to his bedroom to read it.
But when he began reading, he was soon disappointed. The article began promising, reading,
Police are investigating whether 3 shootings, at first believed unrelated, are connected to a bizarre letter sent to the post with the signature Zodiac.
And then he came to the last line.
None of the victims died.
What? He felt like a fool. How could they not be dead? He'd seen them fall to the ground.
Then he read on, and it got worse. The police stating they did not believe the shooter was the San Francisco Zodiac. The letters were not similar to the original Zodiac letters. Handwriting analysis showing they'd been written by different people.
Damn it all. But then Eddie wondered, could it be a trick? Were they trying to trick him into making a wrong move in order to catch him? He had to be careful. He was the one with the power. He was in control. He was the Zodiac.
The next day, the Post reported that detectives had formed a task force entitled Operation Watchdog to locate the Zodiac shooter, which pleased Eddie. There was now an entire task force dedicated just to him, and when he went out, he saw there were police everywhere in Brooklyn, scouring the streets for the new Zodiac, and he smiled to himself because he wasn't going to hit Brooklyn again. His next hunting ground was going to be Manhattan, but he had to hurry before Leo set and Orion rose into the sky to chase the 7 sisters.
Chapter 6. Eddie Takes Manhattan.
The New York press soon became obsessed with the prospect of the Zodiac's return, and for weeks the story ran across the front pages.
New Yorkers were horrified at the possible reappearance of San Francisco's infamous Bay Area killer. Astrologers began appearing on television shows offering their predictions on the crime spree, while many people wondered which star sign would be targeted next. And vigilante groups like the Guardian Angels patrolled the streets looking for the elusive New York Zodiac.
After consulting with astrologers, Operation Watchdog officers noticed a recurring pattern in the Zodiac's attacks, and made a prediction he would strike again on the morning of Thursday, June 21st.
The summer solstice. Dozens of officers were assigned to patrol East New York on foot and in cars in an attempt to apprehend the killer.
And they were right about the date. They only had the location wrong. Eddie was across the East River in Manhattan, searching for prey in Central Park, coming upon 30-year-old Larry Parham as he settled down on a park bench for a night's sleep.
Larry Parham was not your typical homeless person. He was very clean, dressed well, didn't do drugs, and had a bank account with thousands of dollars in it. And he'd actually just gotten himself a brand new job. He was simply sleeping on the streets in order to save his money for an apartment. He didn't want to waste money on a motel. It was summertime after all.
Larry had stayed in homeless shelters before. In fact, he'd even worked in one. But he thought they were dangerous, and it was safer sleeping in the park.
Larry was a religious man. He went to church every Sunday and carried a Bible with him, as well as a notebook, jotting down his thoughts. Things like,
"Don't make the same mistake twice. You must learn. Lord, help me."
That night, Larry spread out some cardboard on a park bench to make it more comfortable, laid out his pillow, and tucked his wallet with $49 in it into his shoe and placed it under the bench. Then wrapped himself up in his coat, pulling it up over his head, all the while not realizing he was being watched, stalked, and hunted by a madman named Heriberto Seda with an uncanny resemblance to Eddie Munster.
When Eddie was sure that Larry Parham was asleep, he crept over and, reaching under the bench, retrieved the shoe with his wallet in it, checking the ID to see what sign he was. A Cancer. Perfect. All was going according to God's plan.
Eddie then took out his note that he'd written earlier and removed his gloves so that he could write a cancer symbol on it, careful to only touch the paper by the edges. But careful as he was, he did leave a fingerprint, which would come back to haunt him.
He then put the note on the bench with a rock atop it and checked the time. 3:52, only moments before Orion would rise over the horizon of skyscrapers.
He took out his zip gun and from just a foot away, fired it at the utterly defenseless and sleeping man's heart.
The .38 caliber bullet pierced Larry's chest, barely missing the aorta artery, and went right through him, exiting under his armpit and embedding itself into the wooden bench.
Larry awoke to incredible pain, noted a figure retreating in the shadows, and realized he was drenched in blood. He could smell burning from where the hot bullet had torn through his coat. He went to stand, couldn't manage to do it, so he rolled off the bench and began to crawl towards the road, wrapping his jacket tightly against his chest to stop the bleeding.
Crying out in pain, he waved down a man passing by, who stopped and looked quizzically at him, a homeless man collecting cans and bottles, and asked, "Hey, what's the matter, man?"
"I was shot. I've been hit. I'm hit."
The homeless man then saw the puddle of blood pooling under Larry, dropped his bag of recyclables, and ran out into the street where he was able to flag a police car down.
Now, how many stories have we covered where people ignored victims? Bloody victims calling out for help, they just drive off and ignore them. A lot. And it seems like it's always the downtrodden that are the best people, ready to help their fellow man.
Yeah, I was wondering how that was going to end. He runs off, but he runs off for help. The next day, a letter arrived at the New York Post which contained the same weird symbols, including a listing of the time, place, and victim's astrological sign. But there was also a sad and blatant attempt to convince the police and media that the New York Zodiac and the San Francisco Zodiac were one and the same. The letter read,
"This is the Zodiac. I have seen the Post, and you say the note sent to the Post not similar to any of the San Francisco Zodiac letters? You are wrong. The handwriting looked different. It is one of the same Zodiac. One Zodiac. In San Francisco, killed a man in the park with a gun, and killed a woman with a knife, and killed a man in the taxi cab with gun."
There was then a crude, childlike drawing of San Francisco Zodiac's outfit he wore during an attack, and underneath was the name Faust at the top of a compass, with 3 sixes representing west, south, and east.
But the letter did nothing to convince law enforcement that he was actually the San Francisco Zodiac, as all evidence pointed to an obvious wannabe and copycat.
But the media, on the other hand, ate it all up as the tantalizing prospect that the San Francisco Zodiac was in New York sold the hell out of the papers.
Larry Parham, who survived, was interviewed by police and described his shooter as a heavy-set African-American man with a mustache, which the press soon began referring to as the evil Al Roker, because of its resemblance to the cheerful TV weatherman.
And the New York Post ran a front-page picture of a heavy-set black man with a mustache saying, "Is this the Zodiac?"
At first, Eddie was delighted, as he looked absolutely nothing like the sketch. But then, he was crestfallen when he read that a fingerprint had been lifted from the note. Now, if he was ever arrested for anything, and his fingerprints taken, they'd know he was the Zodiac. So, he decided to lay low and cease his hunting for the time being.
Operation Watchdog prepared for an August attack, but it never came. As the months passed, it seemed the shootings had ceased, and soon the task force was scaled down from 50 officers to just 18. New Yorkers began to calm down, and the city was no longer in the grip of the Zodiac's shadow.
Chapter 7. The Return of Eddie Munster.
It would be over 2 years before Eddie took up the mantle of Zodiac again. But this time, it was his most heinous attack yet.
On August 10th, 1992, at around 1 a.m, 39-year-old Patricia Fonte met a stranger near the Highland Park Reservoir. He was a good-looking guy, if a little short, and she decided to flirt with him. She asked him for a cigarette. The good-looking guy grinned and said, yeah, he had a smoke for her, but they should walk down to the reservoir to smoke.
As they walked down the trail, Eddie coldly shot Patricia in the back, and she fell to the ground.
But Patricia was a tough-as-hell New Yorker and stood right back up, so Eddie shot her again. And again she got up, this time steaming pissed, and attacked him.
Eddie couldn't believe what was happening, and in a panic pulled a knife and began stabbing her, going into an absolute fury, stabbing her over 100 times, long after she'd gone still.
There was no doubt that this victim was dead. A defenseless, trusting woman who thought he was a good-looking guy. A woman he shot in the back, then brutally stabbed with relentless overkill. Eddie was truly a monster.
Eddie waited a full year before he attacked again.
On June 4th, 1993, at midnight, outside Highland Park, Eddie shot 40-year-old unemployed construction worker Jim Weber in the buttocks, then ran away laughing. It was just a superficial wound, and Jim quickly recovered.
Then on July 20th, again in Highland Park, again near midnight, Eddie shot 40-year-old Joseph Diacone in the head at close range, killing him.
3 months later, another, again in Highland Park, Eddie snuck up behind 40-year-old Diane Ballard, who was sitting on a park bench minding her own business, and shot her in the neck.
Miraculously, the bullet missed her arteries and she survived. But because cowardly Eddie had shot her from behind, she could provide no description of the shooter.
Initially, these three incidents were not associated with the Zodiac, as he didn't send any communication to the authorities. And with an average of 5 murders every single night, New York police detectives did not find anything that connected them. And with no crimes associated with the Zodiac since 1990, many believed he had vanished for good.
Then on March 10th, 1994, Eddie's luck ran out. Or so it seemed at first.
New York is running its infamous stop and frisk program in an effort to clean up the streets. And when cops randomly grabbed Eddie and frisked him, they found a crude zip gun in his pocket.
He was charged with possession of a deadly weapon, but it was somehow incorrectly labeled at the evidence lab, and so was never tested properly, leading police to determine the weapon was not functional, and Eddie's public defender succeeded in getting all of the charges against him dropped, and his arrest records sealed, and his fingerprints were destroyed before they could be filed in the official records and checked for other crimes. He was released a week later.
For Eddie, it was all a sign from God that he was on a path of righteousness, and he was sure that all of the spells, magic, and praying were working perfectly.
Chapter 8. Sleep, my little dead.
On August 1st, 1994, the New York Post received a new Zodiac letter, which had been mailed with a love stamp. It contained a list of victims claimed so far.
The letter included 9 bizarre totem pole codes, underneath which was written, "Sleep, my little dead, how we loathe them."
To the right of the totem pole codes were written the dates, times, and manner of attacks of each new victim, which corresponded to the attacks on Patricia Fonte, Jim Weber, Joseph Diacone, and Diane Ballard, as well as an unreported attack on a white man who was shot with a .22 caliber zip gun in Highland Park on June 11th, 1994, which to this day has not been verified. It is unknown whether this victim died or, like most of Eddie's victims, survived with minor injuries.
The police released the letter to the public a week later, and soon the city was again gripped in a blind panic, fearing the return of the Zodiac.
The weird totem pole code was composed of international maritime signal flags and was cracked by New York Post journalist Kieran Crowley, who would later write a book about Eddie and his crimes called Sleep, My Little Dead, which was one of the main sources for this episode. Great book, too. If this case interests you, check it out.
Kieran solved the cipher with help from his father-in-law, a veteran of World War II, who had worked in signals intelligence and cryptography. When deciphered, the code read,
"This is the Zodiac speaking. I am in control. Who mastery? Be ready for more. Yours truly."
Chapter 9. Eddie hates Chachi.
No more despair. I have paid more than I owe. Now what you see is what I give you, Sonny. And one of my prayers, I have asked for light alone. Fortunately, instead, my mind just got stronger. I'll never dream of mother again. Sigmund says I'm fine.
As Eddie's sister Chachi grew older, she began taking less and less shit from her older brother Eddie, who she considered an absolute loser, with no job, no girlfriend, no friends, no life at all.
Chachi began rebelling against Eddie. She'd finally moved out of her mother's room and made the living room her bedroom, despite Eddie forbidding it. She told him, "You're not the boss of me."
Chachi quit school at 16 and started working in a bakery, and was now the only one in the family working, the only one bringing any money home.
Interestingly, one of her customers at the bakery, a nice old man from Ecuador who limped and walked with a cane, was none other than Mario Orozco, her brother's first victim.
Small world, man, small world. Eddie, meanwhile, had found a new hobby, being a snitch. He ratted out his neighbor for selling drugs, spying on her, telling the cops exactly where she hid her dope, in the windowsill.
Emboldened, Eddie began going out with his Bible to the corners where the dope dealers peddled their wares, demanding that they repent, change their lives, give up drugs, and turn to God. And word soon got out that he was a snitch who'd ratted out his neighbor.
Chachi often hung out in the street with her friends. She was a good girl, she didn't do hard drugs, but she just liked to hang out and dance. It's just what you did in Brooklyn in the 90s. And she knew all the local gangsters and told them all how she hated her brother. What a dickhead he was. How he sat around doing nothing all day while she worked at the bakery and brought home money.
Some of the local drug dealers started telling her there was a lot of talk about how her brother was a rat. So she warned Eddie, telling him to mind his own business, that what he was doing was dangerous.
Eddie told her he was doing God's work and that it was God's business.
Then Eddie ratted out a corner candy store that was selling weed.
These things were everywhere in New York City back in the day. Tiny little stores with a few bars of chocolate that were complete fronts for selling weed. This place was completely harmless, and actually it brought in a lot of money for the neighborhood, as well as supplying good pot for the locals. It was basically beloved.
Well, the cops raided the place, confiscating 200 bags of what they called the chronic at the time, high-grade indica cannabis.
When word got out that it was Eddie that had ratted the place out to the cops, he got jumped by a couple local gangsters who beat the shit out of him and told him it was the final warning. Quit snitching, or he was a dead man.
So Eddie prepared for war. He started constructing pipe bombs and managed to order a canister of tear gas from one of his Soldier of Fortune magazines. He ordered a Swiss Army helmet and even constructed a homemade hand grenade and got himself a shotgun.
June 18th, 1996 was a gorgeous summer day in Brooklyn. Eddie's mom, Gladys, had taken the subway to Manhattan to attend Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral, as she had done every single day of her life.
Eddie sat in his room praying and performing strange rituals with essential oils and salt, reading a pulp paperback called The Black Rainbow.
Chachi was chilling in the living room, listening to music with her friend Wilbur Rios, who went by Tush, a known drug dealer who wore flashy designer tracksuits and had a long criminal rap sheet.
Chachi and Tush were sitting on the sofa laughing when Eddie started pounding on the wall.
Eddie hated laughter, thought it was evil and of the devil, and knew of Tush's reputation, despised him.
Eddie was a real bummer. And when Chachi and Tush refused to stop laughing, Eddie took his shotgun and fired it through the door.
Chachi, who was no longer afraid of her loser brother, who was now 26 and still living in his childhood bedroom, leapt up and threw open Eddie's door, screaming,
"What the fuck? What is wrong with you? Why you always gotta be all up in my business?"
Eddie just sat there, glaring.
Chachi shook her head, said, "Fuck you, motherfucker!" and turned to leave.
Then Eddie, being a complete coward and piece of shit, shot his own sister in the back. He always shoots everyone in the back.
Chachi was sprayed with birdshot and thrown to the floor by the blast, blood pouring from her wounds, and began screaming for her friend, "Tush, Tush, Tush, help me, I've been shot!"
But Tush was just as cowardly as Eddie, and instead of helping her, he hid behind the door and then began barricading himself in the room.
Chachi managed to get to her feet and make it to the kitchen, where she grabbed the phone, but Eddie charged in and slapped it out of her hands, ripping it out of the wall before turning and going back to his room. And Chachi, fearing he was going to get his gun, stumbled to the door, staggered out into the hall, and began banging on the neighbor's door.
The neighbor let her in and called the police as Chachi lay on her sofa moaning in pain. Paramedics managed to come up and administer first aid, but as police began to arrive outside the apartment building, Eddie leaned out the window with his shotgun and began firing at them, right in the middle of a crowded Brooklyn street.
It was insanity. Cops were diving for cover as the cement exploded into dust as shot after shot rang out. A man walking by was struck in the neck by a flying piece of masonry.
Eddie fired right at the police cars, shattering their windshield, pinning police down as an officer screamed into his radio.
1013, shots fired at officers!
Another officer radioed in. 1013, central emergency, we've got 7 cops pinned down. Shots fired, shots fired.
Mothers were grabbing their children and racing away, men ducking into doorways as more police cars came screeching to the scene with sirens blaring, officers now firing back. Up into the apartment window where Eddie stood, pointing a shotgun at them.
It was sheer pandemonium as they traded shots back and forth at each other, bullets shattering the pavement.
A tough-as-nails Brooklyn little old lady made her way up the street, refusing to listen to the cops ordering her to get down as they ducked behind cars, an officer having to get up from behind cover and confront her, screaming in her face to get back or she could get shot. Another officer thinking, just another day in East New York.
Eddie now had on his Swiss Army helmet, and he was ducking and weaving behind his mother's potted plants in the window, jumping up the fire and ducking back down again.
A 9-block area was cordoned off. A SWAT team, helicopter, and armored car called in. Residents were fleeing down fire escapes as a squadron of ESU officers arrived in bulletproof body armor and helmets, carrying Mini 14 assault rifles.
Eventually, the shooting stopped, and a negotiator, Detective Joey Herbert of the 17th Precinct, bravely came out into the street with his hands held up, yelling, "Don't shoot! My name is Joey, and I'm here to talk."
Eddie screamed at them to get the cops off the roof and the helicopters out of there, saying, "I have explosives, I'm barricaded, and you guys are bugging me."
Joey called off some of the cops, and eventually Eddie allowed Joey and some of the other officers to enter the building and walk up to the apartment.
The door was ajar, and Eddie called out to them, asking how much jail time he was going to get.
Joey told him not much, since luckily no one had died.
Then Eddie agreed to accompany Joey downstairs, where he was arrested.
When Eddie saw Tush come out, he muttered, "I should have killed him."
When the officers entered the apartment and saw all the zip guns and weird books, they joked how it would be too much of a coincidence if the guy turned out to be the Zodiac shooter.
At the station, Detectives asked Eddie to write his version of what had happened, and he did so.
In a rambling confession with very poor spelling and grammar, Eddie described the events which led to his arrest, and at the bottom of the page he drew the crossed circle symbol of the Zodiac, the same symbol which had been added to each of the letters.
Immediately, Detective Danny Powers recognized the symbol and notified homicide detectives, who all agreed that it looked very much as though Eddie could be the New York Zodiac.
Eddie was fingerprinted, the prints compared to the Zodiac letter, and they matched perfectly. Cold busted.
So Eddie soon gave a complete confession to everything, and he was formally charged on June 21st, the summer solstice, 1996, with being the New York Zodiac.
The evidence was overwhelming. The handwriting on his incident statement matched that of the Zodiac letters. His fingerprints matched those found at the crime scenes. But most damning of all, his DNA was found on a stamp attached to one of the Zodiac letters sent to police.
During his subsequent trial at the State Supreme Court for the County of Queens, New York, he was charged with 3 murders and 5 attempted murders.
Eddie was unruly and a general asshole during the trial, screaming profanities at the judge and acting out.
After the 6-week trial, he was found guilty on June 24th, 1998, and sentenced to 232 years imprisonment in New York's notorious Attica prison.
In prison, Seda read the Bible every day and often quoted scripture to his fellow inmates. He wrote to his sister and attempted to call her, but she refused any contact with him.
And in 2003, Eddie finally found love. The 35-year-old virgin who'd never been kissed began a romantic relationship in prison with a Latina trans woman named Cynthia China Blast, prisoner number 97A0308, who was a member of the Latin King street gang and convicted of murder.
Cynthia says about giving Eddie the first kiss of his life, "It was weird. I thought he was going to eat my lips. I'd read a lot of books about serial killers, and I didn't trust him, like he might bite my face off or something. But instead he started shaking. I felt like I was 11 and having my first kiss with a bowl of Jell-O, because he didn't know how to kiss for nothing. He was a virgin. Let's just say he's a pro now."
Cynthia tried on numerous occasions to obtain gender reassignment surgery in prison, and the couple attempted legal action to be granted permission to be married, which they were denied. But that didn't stop these 2 lovebirds. Instead, they had a spiritual wedding.
Cynthia got a tattoo on her ring finger with Eddie's initials and a tiny Zodiac symbol. Oh man, that's fucked up. As well as a large tattoo on her back that depicts her and Eddie's intertwined astrological signs. Well, she went all in, man. She's a Virgo and he's a Leo.
Cynthia says about it all,
"It seems that my only attractions are to society's sickest and most twisted lowlifes. I'm actually hoping to be incarcerated with the son of Sam so I can sleep with him while awaiting my sex change outcome in the court."
and Eddie, he didn't mind this at all, stating, "I liked that she was excited by my murders. It was a little plus for both of us."
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we've given you the story of Heriberto Seda, aka Eddie Munster, the New York Zodiac. Thank you so much for listening.
And do you have a case you'd like us to cover? You got some information you think we should know? You got a band and you want us to play your song? Just want to say hi? reach out to us anytime at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next week for more tales of madness and murder.
See you then.